Yes, I finally did it. I got a network attached storage device and it's a Synology DS923 Plus equipped with Synology 3.5-inch drives. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing the pros and cons of getting one of these ready-made systems. And I'm going to be reviewing this particular model, the DS923 Plus. And I'll explain why I went with this model specifically over the other options. Since this is not a new model in the Synology lineup at the time of publishing this video, and because it has already been reviewed by other channels on YouTube, I'll take a more engineering approach to show you how this fits into my workspace, and I'll try to measure things like power efficiency and noise level using the gear that I have here in the lab. We'll also take a look at thermal design, build quality, and potential upgrades that I plan to do to this system. So as an introduction, let me give you a rundown of my requirements which I used in my selection process that ended up with this particular model. First and most important, I needed a way to store my files for rapid local access, for security and privacy reasons, and just to have full control over my storage. I used to use several external hard drives connected over USB to my computer, and those amounted to about 5 terabytes of total storage space. So I would need at least that for this new system. I would need this new system to contain at least 4 3.5-inch storage bays to give me a little bit of flexibility in the number of drives that I can put in, and to consider a possible future upgrade in storage. And although not absolutely mandatory, it would have been a nice bonus if this system would be able to run several secondary apps, like some sort of security camera surveillance, some sort of a file download manager, and the cherry on top, it would be really nice if it would allow me to run a couple of virtual machines if needed, just for some local stuff like Home Assistant, for example. I would also need this system to be fairly energy efficient. I would need it to consume, less than 50 watts in idle, because it will be always on inside my office, and also because it's running inside my office where I also do my work and I edit videos sometimes. I would need the system to be fairly quiet so that it doesn't bother me. And also very important for me, I would need this system and its whole setup process and managing process to be as frictionless as possible and go as smooth as possible, because in my situation as a 3-year-old dad and being quite busy at work, I would very much prefer spending my free time with my family doing fun stuff instead of being buried in my man cave for days on end working and debugging on a DIY NAS solution. This argument might have been different 5 years ago, and I might have chosen the DIY route for the system, but not today. So because of this last aspect, I kind of ruled out the DIY NAS option, because personally I have tried a couple of those options in the past few months just to check them out, and I've also spoken to friends that either manage a DIY NAS or they've tried it and then they ended up with the Synology anyway. So I gathered all of this feedback and kind of ruled out the DIY option, because even though it's often cheaper, more powerful, and more flexible, it just eats up too much of your available time, which I don't really have much lately. And I knew that if I would go that DIY route, it would become a burden to maintain over time. So why a Synology, and why this DS923 Plus specifically as a model has been chosen? Well, Synology as a brand, it's a no-brainer. It's a fairly easy decision to make, because they're this well-established company with a mature product lineup. They have some very mature software and managing interface for their devices. They have a well-established distribution worldwide, They do have great support for their products, and they just seem to offer more bang per buck, more functionality when everything is considered if you compare them with some of the other brands on the market. And like I said, I gathered feedback and I got to see one of these in action at a friend's house, and he's been using it for a couple of years, and I got some great feedback from this friend that I trust. And so I used all of that feedback to focus on Synology as a brand. And why the DS923 Plus specifically? Well, I started with this idea that I might need a 4-bay system, like I said, to give me the flexibility to put more drives in, lower capacity, and then maybe later on to expand to larger drives if needed. This 4-bay system just gives me the flexibility that I need for my specific needs. And like I said, it would be nice to be able to run some virtual machines, and that puts you into the Plus lineup of models from Synology. So that's how I ended up with the model selection, the DS923 Plus. But if you want the benefit of one extra drive bay, you can also look at the DS1522 Plus, which comes with 5 3.5 inch bays and also adds a bunch of Ethernet ports on the back while keeping the same hardware pretty much similar. And also because I was initially looking at purchasing the DS923 Plus and registering it as a business expense, I didn't think it was worth paying extra for the DS1522 Plus for the 5th drive bay if I wasn't going to use that for the next 2 or 3 years. But then I reached out to Synology and I told them my plan that I have to shoot these videos about upgrading my lab to a network attached storage, and they offered to send this unit for free for the purpose of the review. As always on the Voldoc YouTube channel, I fully disclose these things, and just by receiving this product for free, it doesn't mean that it's gonna change my technical assessment of this unit. You'll still get my honest review. As you would expect, the unit comes very well packed, and inside the box you get the NAS in all its glory, a big 120 watt power brick, 2 RJ45 pigtails, some mounting accessories, and a quick start guide. Now, before moving forward, a few more technical details about the DS923 Plus model. As already mentioned, there's 4 hot swappable full 3.5 inch bays, 2 1 gigabit rated Ethernet ports with optional 10 gigabit Ethernet upgrade card available, and we'll talk about that later. It also has 2 full USB 3.2 ports for external expansion and an external expansion port on the back, which looks like eSATA, and you can use this to then expand to one of Synology's expansion boxes, which gives you more 3.5 inch bays. Internally, it comes with 4 GB Synology branded DDR4 SODIMM, which occupies one of the 2 slots available, and it has an AMD Ryzen R1600 processor, which gives you plenty of processing power while being very efficient, but importantly, it does not contain a built-in GPU core, so it's not optimized for running any sort of media encoding if you plan to run a media server on your NAS as a virtual machine. There are other models in the Synology lineup which have Intel processors that may be better suited for that task. All of this comes with a 3-year warranty from a reputable brand name. Oh, and I almost forgot one very important aspect. It contains 2 NVMe M.2 slots on the bottom where you can install SSDs, which you can define as a normal storage pool or as cache, and we'll also talk about that later in the video. The hard drives they sent are these HAT3300-4T. The 4T stands for 4 terabytes. There's 3 of them, and these are part of their Plus lineup, which is designed for personal and small business usage. They're more affordable. The benefits of using these Synology drives is that they support firmware updates directly through the NAS, so you get support from Synology directly. And these are supposed to be guaranteed to be more reliable because they use CMR technology and have been tested extensively, which should ensure consistent performance throughout their lifetime. They quote a 1 million MTBF on these. Now, of course, Synology doesn't manufacture their own drives, They are just rebranded from one of the well-known manufacturers. In fact, it says so on the label. It's manufactured by Seagate. So it is well possible to fit other types of drives into your NAS system if you choose to do so. It used to be that Synology branded drives were more expensive, but these days one of these HAT3300 4TB costs in the EU in the range of €130, VAT included, which is pretty much the same cost as a Seagate Ironwolf 4TB with similar specs. So I don't see why you wouldn't want to get the manufacturer recommended if it's the same cost and you get better support. In fact, in some cases, when there are discounts, you can even find the Synology Plus series for a little bit cheaper. So in my humble opinion, it's well worth taking a look at these Synology drives. Installing the hard drives is fairly easy. You first have to open the side clips, then push in the drive and reattach the clips which hold in the drive. There's no screws needed at all, and I love this mounting system. In the meantime, I wanted to be prepared for caching because this NAS supports NVMe SSD caching, which is going to speed up things. So I purchased two of these affordable Kingston NVMe drives in 512 GB capacity. This has PCIe 4.0 interface in the M.2 format. Not that it would matter to get a drive with PCIe 4.0 because the NAS only supports PCIe 3.0, but this was like a cheap model anyway. Don't make the same mistake that I did originally to only purchase one SSD, because as I discovered and corrected later, while the NAS supports both read and write cache, it needs one SSD dedicated per read and one per write cache. With everything connected, I hooked it up to a 1 gigabit switch, pushed the power button, and I could hear it start. Drives came online one after the other. And when everything was ready, I could hear a beep as well as a visual indication of the drives being present with these green LEDs. There are several ways of setting up your new NAS. In my case, I had to look on my router to check the IP address it got, but then accessing the local IP address of the NAS prompts me to start my setup. This is where I would have appreciated some form of auto discovery feature because my computer and the NAS were on the same network. There is a smartphone app called DS923, which I think if used can find the NAS on your network, so you don't have to go looking for its IP address. But I had no idea that app existed when I first started the setup on my computer. I worked my way through the setup, which is quite a decently simple process with explanations along the way and not too many confusing options. I think this is where the benefits of choosing a Synology NAS start to show. I've set up a single volume based on the 3 drives in RAID 5, which, remember, these drives, they are 4 terabyte drives, and the resulting RAID 5 volume is 7.3 terabytes total. And I get the advantages of being able to lose one drive while keeping the parity intact. And I also enabled encryption, and the system was already working in the background on applying all of these to the drives while I was still able to make other changes like setting up email notifications. Now, during the setup, it also prompts you to opt for Synology extended warranty if you wish to do so. There's a 90-day window under which you can register for extended warranty, but as shown here, this is a paid option, so because of that, I opted not to subscribe. For me, the standard 2-year warranty seems like good enough. And in basically no time, I was up and running inside the web interface, which gives me the feeling that I'm inside some sort of operating system, but through a browser view. It all feels very modern. I don't see the purpose of going into the details of the user interface. It's all very configurable, and it's probably boring to watch me talk about these details, but I will mention this. It's polished, it's modern, intuitive to use, and even during the setup process, which might contain terms that you may not necessarily be familiar with, like RAID 5 or Btrfs, it does explain briefly in simple terms what those mean and what's the recommended option to choose, so anyone should be able to complete this setup without any issues. And after creating my first storage pool, creating some folders and enabling cache on my NVMe drives, the obvious thing was to copy some files over to the new NAS and check the speeds. And there's multiple ways you can do that. Synology does offer you an app which you can use to sync files in a cloud style, but you also have the more classic option of a network shared drive, which I prefer because I can map that network drive to my Mac PC or to my Windows PC and just use it right away, same as with the local drive. So remember, both my Mac PC and the NAS are connected via a 1 gigabit link, and by checking the resource manager for copying generally large files of several gigabytes in size, it showed that I was getting roughly 100 to 105 megabytes write speed, which is what you would expect for the 1 gigabit link. That's our bottleneck. So yes, you can consider the 1 gigabit Ethernet ports to be a limiting factor depending on the application, but if that's a problem, you just spend a little extra and get the optional 10 gigabit Ethernet card, which you would plug into the back of the unit, and I might do that at a later point. I agree, it's a bummer that we don't get at least 2.5 gigabit included, but listen, at least in my case, that has minimal impact. During normal usage, 100 megabytes per second is plenty to do the usual file storage, archiving, and even to do editing directly off the NAS, with the important note that I only do Full HD 1080p 60 frames per second. Stuff like 4K footage, depending on the bitrate, might need higher transfer speeds for live editing off the NAS. But with 1080p footage in Final Cut Pro, it works just as smooth as if it were stored locally on the PC. So in my use case, I'm not observing any major limiting factor just because I'm running on 1 gigabit, except that, very large transfers will take a little longer. Now, while we are here, let me also mention a few of the bonus features that you'll be getting with such a system. I was very pleasantly surprised to discover the Synology ecosystem and the fact that it has many apps that you can install for various functionality. For example, it supports Cloud Sync for various services, including Google Drive. So because I already had a service on my Home Assistant server backing up remotely to my Google Drive, it was very simple now to sync my Google Drive to my Synology NAS for long-term archiving. Because my Google Drive has limited storage space, so I was only keeping a few running backups on my Google Drive. I was also planning on enabling FTP upload and backup for a couple of my security cameras, again for long-term storage, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that Synology offers an app which is called Surveillance Station, which directly supports many popular security camera manufacturers and models, and it has full NVR capabilities complete with event detections. So instead of enabling plain old FTP upload for a Reolink and an older Dahua camera, now they're directly supported, and I even get events recorded in the surveillance app. It even supports my Reolink dual lens camera, which offers a wide and a narrow angle feed. But one important limitation that I have to mention here is that they only allow you to use 2 cameras for free, and for adding more, you'll have to purchase a license to support more cameras. But even so, it feels like a very nice feature to have because you're paying for the NAS, you have all of this storage, and now it doubles as an NVR for multiple brands of cameras. Another thing that I was thinking of doing is to set up a Home Assistant instance for my office because I have an air purifier. I'll maybe add the CO2 sensor, temperature and presence sensors for a small setup. And I wouldn't want to run like a dedicated Raspberry Pi just for that. So first I tried setting it up as a Docker container, and that went super smooth and fast, and I was up and running in like 2 minutes, but only to discover that you don't get the add-on menu with Home Assistant running as a container. That's a limitation of Home Assistant, but here's the nice thing with a mature ecosystem like Synology. You just switch to setting it up as a virtual machine instead, which Synology also supports. You just have to keep in mind that a virtual machine will always use up more resources than a Docker container. In particular, you'll need more RAM for running this. And in my case, just running the Home Assistant OS increased my RAM usage from 30% to around 85% by running on the default supplied 4 GB stick. But that's something I can easily upgrade in the future if needed. In fact, spoiler alert, by the time I finished preparing this review video, I had already upgraded my unit to 32 gigabytes of RAM, but I would probably share that story in a separate future video. Another nice feature from Synology is that you get this download manager app which can completely run on your NAS and can help you by downloading in the background. And it's not just torrents, it can support classic HTTP downloads, but also a very wide variety of file storage type websites. So I'm slowly starting to make use of that as well whenever I need to download larger files. Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, I wanted to measure the noise level. And I find the system to be generally quiet. You can certainly tell there is something idling in the room, but it's not enough to disturb you in any meaningful way. And apart from the brief occasional drive head movement noises, which can be heard when you initiate, writes or reads, those are perfectly normal. But other than that, you can't really hear anything else. And let's put it this way, unless you're an extremely sensitive person about noise, you wouldn't have a problem sleeping with this in your room. The actual figures from my measurement with the Unity sound meter aimed directly at the system at a distance of roughly 50 centimeters, I'm getting 36.5 dBs. And this is with the fan running in quiet mode. Now, to put this into context, with the NAS turned off in the exact same spot, I'm getting 36 dB, so barely any change above my quiet office ambient noise levels when I turn on the system. You just can't complain about these results. They're great, and it would be very hard to achieve similar results with a DIY build unless you're investing tons of money. Now, what about its power usage? Because in certain parts of the world, energy costs have increased in the past 2 or 3 years, and generally, even if the cost would not be an issue, people want to consume less. Well, in my particular setup with the mentioned 3 drives, which are 3.5-inch running at 5400 RPM, with Synology surveillance station monitoring a couple of cameras, a home assistant virtual machine, and a few extra services, I am measuring around 28 to 30 watts power usage. Idle. Again, that's an excellent figure for something that runs 24/7, and it would be very difficult to beat that with a DIY build. And your mileage will vary, as the power usage will vary with the types of drives you use, the number of drives you use, with the services that you enable, and the CPU load will have an impact on those numbers. But just in my setup, I'm getting these numbers. Yours may vary, but still it should give you a pretty good idea of what power usage to expect if you need a similar setup. In terms of thermal performance, it just feels like it has been very well engineered, and checking with my thermal camera, I see no problematic hotspots. I see just normal values. And by the way, this is a new thermal camera which I received from our good friends over on lshop.com. It has this great autofocus mode, so I can focus both on close-up objects and then I can refocus on a greater distance. So I'm going to be reviewing this one soon. But like I said, regarding the NAS, no obvious hotspots. Everything looks normal, and I'm running in quiet mode in an ambient of roughly 25 degrees Celsius. Now, if we check the hard drive status page, it shows the 3.5-inch drives are running at 35 degrees Celsius at idle, and the NVMe drives are running basically close to ambient temperature at 26. Of course, we might notice a bump here and there if we put the system through its paces, but it will remain within normal values, and all while being pretty quiet. So I would say it's a very well designed and efficient system. Now, on the topic of the 10 gigabit Ethernet card upgrade, there is the option to purchase the official Synology upgrade card. It costs approximately 130 euros, VAT included in the EU. Or you can get an aftermarket no-name card, which I have no idea how well it's going to be behaving. But it's going to cost you something like 70 euros on AliExpress. I'm thinking of doing this upgrade, maybe searching for an original card on the second-hand market, because if at any point I'm switching to 4K video editing, or I simply expand storage, maybe even switch to SSD storage, I would want the ability to read and write files faster. That will come in handy. But that's a topic for a feature video. So there you have it. This Synology DS923 Plus has proven to be a really solid choice that ticks most of the boxes for my needs, if not all. It's powerful, it's quiet, it's energy efficient, and incredibly easy to set up and maintain. Synology has clearly put a lot of thought into into the user experience, and the DSM software is just a joy to work with. And while the 1 gigabit Ethernet ports might be a bottleneck for some, it hasn't been a major issue for my 1080p video editing workflow, and the potential for 10 gigabit expansion is there if you need it in the future. I'm also really impressed with how the Synology ecosystem and the range of apps available exist. There's Surveillance Station, the Download Manager, and the ability to run Docker containers and virtual machines. This just adds a lot of value and versatility to this NAS. Of course, now no product is perfect. The limited free camera licenses for Surveillance Station and the need to purchase a separate 10 gigabit Ethernet card are points to consider, but overall the DS923 Plus offers a fantastic balance of performance, features, and ease of use. It makes it a great choice for both home and small business users like myself, and if you're in the market for a reliable, feature-rich NAS with a polished user interface, I can definitely recommend putting the Synology DS923 Plus on your shortlist. But what do you think about Synology products? Are you using one of their NAS systems? Is there anything I missed in this review? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time.